Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever heard a story that just clicks? I mean, it's so logical, so perfectly argued, that you find yourself nodding along thinking, yeah, that has to be true. Only to find out later it was, well, a complete fabrication. Today, we're diving into exactly that. We're going to look at the architecture of a lie and how a method that seems flawless can lead you somewhere totally false.
This right here. This is the central puzzle we're going to unpack. It's a massive warning sign for the age we live in, right? The idea that just because the steps make sense, A leads to B leads to C, it doesn't mean the final destination is actually, the truth. It's like you're following a perfect roadmap, but it leads you right off a cliff. So how does that even happen? How is that trick pulled off?
And that's the real question, isn't it? In this explainer, we are going to look under the hood of what makes a story believable. We're going to see just how easy it is to dress up pure fiction as solid fact, and what makes a lie feel so intensely true, even when its foundations are basically made of thin air. Okay, so to see this in action, we're going to use a fantastic case study, the psychological thriller Monolith. Now, just to be super clear, this is not a movie review. We're using this film because it's more than just a story. It's a story about how stories get made, and more importantly, how that whole process can go completely, terribly wrong. So the setup is actually pretty simple. We're following a journalist who's been disgraced, and she is desperate for a comeback, so she turns to podcasting. She stumbles onto this anonymous tip about a weird black brick, the monolith, that's supposedly popping up all over the world. So she starts digging, right? Following what feels like a trail of clues, listening to these vague, anonymous voices. But as she gets more and more obsessed with building this grand narrative, the film does something really clever. It shows us that the real story isn't about the brick at all. It's about her. All right, let's break this down. We are going to put her whole investigation right under the microscope and really map out the anatomy of a false truth. Where exactly does a seemingly methodical process start to go off the rails and end up building a complete lie? Well, the film basically lays out a recipe, a kind of formula that's used over and over again to cook up some of the most compelling conspiracy theories. Step 1, you start with an unexplained event, something mysterious, like this black brick. Step 2, you add a really powerful personal motivation. For her, it's this desperate need to redeem her career. Then you just mix it all together using a structure that looks professional and methodical. And what do you get in the end? A story, a narrative that feels absolutely unshakably true.
And here's the first bit of poison in the recipe: confirmation bias. See, instead of letting the evidence guide her to a story, she starts with the story that she needs to be true. Then she goes out hunting only for the pieces that fit. Any shred of evidence that supports her theory, it gets blown up, it becomes central. And anything that contradicts it, pushed aside, ignored, explained away. It's a dangerous trap where you literally become the architect of your own delusion.
And on top of that, you have this second, really powerful force at play. Her investigation is completely driven by her past trauma. That public humiliation she suffered isn't just backstory, it is the engine for this entire thing. Her need for redemption becomes so overwhelming that the investigation stops being about the brick and starts being about her. The story has to be massive. It has to be a world-changing conspiracy, because that's the only thing big enough to fix what's broken in her own life. So this brings us to the core illusion of the whole process. On the surface, what you see looks like a rigorous professional investigation. She's following leads, she's interviewing sources, she's connecting the dots. But the reality? It's completely rotten. The methodology is false. Those leads are just unverified whispers from strangers. The sources are totally anonymous voices on the internet. And connecting the dots? Well, that's just her own personal bias forcing a pattern onto what is essentially just noise. It's the perfect illusion of a sound process.
But here's the thing, the film's real warning isn't just about one fictional podcaster in a movie. It's really holding up a mirror to the world that you and I are living in right now. So let's zoom out from the film for a minute and look at what this story about storytelling means for all of us.
And this right here is the big takeaway. Monolith uses a journalist, but its message is for everybody. It's a diagnosis of a very modern problem, the fragility of truth itself. Think about it. We live in an age where anyone with a phone can have a microphone and a global platform. The power to build a reality, one that feels true, no matter the facts, has never been more in our hands. The journalist in the movie could easily be any one of these new storytellers. You know, the true crime podcaster who gets a little too invested, the YouTuber making slick documentaries, the online sleuths on Reddit piecing together clues. The tools are the same, and so are the pressures. You need content that grabs people, the temptation to create a huge, grand narrative is always there, and you can present it all with a professional shine that makes it almost impossible to tell fact from fiction. That's why one critic called the film a masterclass in this exact thing. It's a perfect demonstration of a really powerful and kind of dangerous idea. If a story is compelling enough, if it taps into a deep human emotion like justice or redemption, we often just stop checking the foundations. The feeling of the story becomes its own proof. So we've taken apart the film, we've looked at the flawed process, and we've connected it to the world around us. So what's the one thing, the final, crucial lesson we should take away from all this? Why does understanding this stuff even matter? If you remember one thing from this explainer, make it this. A story's power does not make it true. We have to learn to separate that feeling of something being believable from the actual fact of it being real. Because believability isn't something that's just there. It's constructed, it's built. And as we've seen, you can build a very, very convincing house out of nothing but rotten wood and lies. And that really leaves us with one final question for you. The next time you're listening to a podcast or watching an online deep dive, where you just hear a story that feels so right, so compelling, will you stop for a second and ask yourself, what is actually holding this thing up? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.